Hi, welcome to the instructional video series for the Strategic Decarbonization Assessment tool that's being used for the NYSERDA Empire Building Challenge program. Note, this is video number 1 of 4. In this section, we'll be going through the Instructions tab, which includes an overview of how to use the tool, and the Building Info and Assumptions tab, which is where you'll enter key input information about your facility. The purpose of this tool is to improve capital planning for your facility by allowing you to create and compare different possible scenarios for future action. It's a forecasting tool that uses a discounted cash flow analysis for different scenarios that you create and compares them against a baseline business as usual scenario. This iteration of the tool has been created specifically for the NYSERDA Empire Building Challenge and the New York context, and includes information, for example, regarding compliance with Local Law 97. So let's start with the instructions page for the Strategic Decarbonization Assessment tool, which I'll also refer to as the SDA Tool throughout these instructional videos. On the Instructions tab, the left half of the tab contains a flowchart that walks through the different steps of using the tool. These generally correspond to the tabs found at the bottom, going from left to right. In the first tab, you'll enter building information about your facility. This includes characteristics such as square footage and typology, energy use data, operating assumptions, including financial data, and review data about the regulatory context, such as fines associated with compliance with Local Law 97 and carbon emissions ratios. Next, you'll enter a basic equipment inventory for your facility, covering major mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and other equipment that's currently operating in your facility. The purpose of the equipment inventory is to allow an assessment of a baseline or business as usual scenario that includes replacement of your existing equipment at the end of its remaining useful life, as well as things like deferred maintenance or life safety upgrades. In step number 3, you'll enter different measures, such as energy conservation measures or ECMs, as well as other activities such as buying carbon offsets that you may be considering to complete at your facility. And you'll also enter information about these measures, such as first costs, operating costs, impacts on maintenance, energy savings, and carbon emissions savings. Finally, in step 4, you'll be able to order those ECMs or other actions in order to create different scenarios, and then compare the implications of those scenarios against your baseline or business as usual condition, looking at things like net present value, operating costs, and income over time, as well as EUI and carbon emissions trajectories, and allow for comparison against Local Law 97 requirements. The right half of the page contains those same steps and links to each of these tabs. It also contains a key, which will be repeated throughout the tool. Note that light blue cells include or indicate user inputs, so places where you need to be entering information about your facility. White cells indicate calculations. Orange cells contain default or standard reference values. For example, standard emissions ratios for different fuels as associated with Local Law 97. And then finally, green cells include instructions. So let's walk through the first tab, Building Info and Assumptions. You'll note on the left that the tab can be broken up into different sections, which you can expand or hide by clicking on these plus signs or minus signs. The first section contains key building characteristics. I've entered here test data so that you can see the kind of information that needs to be entered in. Basic facility information, its address, contact information. Gross floor area for the facility, including both conditioned, heated, and cooled, and total, and percent owned versus percent leased. Space type and floor area by different facility typologies. And you'll note here a drop-down menu. And this is also associated with standard building typologies and architecture, as well as Local Law 97 compliance. Note that you'll need to select whether your building is a commercial building type or a multifamily building type, as this will flow through and affect different baseline assumptions about your facility. Finally, you'll need to enter some of the energy sources at your facility, whether that's electricity, gas, steam, renewable energy, fuel oil, or other fuels, and indicate the kind of metering that you're using at your facility. After real estate characteristics, you'll have a chance to review basic regulatory assumptions or basic financial characteristics about your facility. So you'll be able to enter assumptions about your building's expenses, holding period, assessed value, ownership type, management type, rent, and income. Note here these orange cells, which reference standard reference data about New York facility or New York building rental data. These can be overwritten with your own facilities data if you have it. The same can be said for other building financial assumptions found in the highlighted cells here. In the left, in the blue cells, you'll have the chance to enter information about your building and its financial assumptions, such as management fees, your discount rate, rentable to gross square footage, square foot per worker or per occupant, and then different dollars per square foot assumptions around everything from utility costs to cleaning costs to parking. Currently, the data here is referencing these orange cells on the right, which are pulled from a number of different industry reports about standard building data in New York. Again, these can be referenced, or you can enter your own facilities data if you have it. Moving on from real estate characteristics, we go to regulatory assumptions. And most of this is reference data for the New York context, matching compliance with Local Law 97. On the top is a set of emissions factors associated with different types of fuels. Here, we've entered emissions factors for electricity, natural gas, and purchased steam, referencing the New York Local Law 97 greenhouse gas coefficients for 2024 to 2029. If you have other fuels, you can enter in their emissions factors as well. There's a standard set of fines associated with Local Law 97 noncompliance. And then there's a standard set of building emissions limits for Local Law 97 compliance, both shown here for the 2024 to 2029 period, as well as for the 2030 to 2034 period, and matching those building typologies listed here, which again, you'll enter for your specific facility. Finally, at the bottom of this section, the tool calculates your building emissions limits for 2024 to 2029 and for 2030 to 2034, depending on the typology and the square footage. You can also enter the cost of carbon offsets. And if you do choose to then look at carbon offsets as a possible activity in your building or a mechanism for compliance, this cost of carbon offsets will carry forward into that calculation. After reviewing the information about regulatory assumptions, you'll enter your facility's energy use. Here, you'll start with a table where you'll list all of the fuels that are being used at your facility, whether that's electricity, gas, steam, chilled water, fuel oil, renewables, or other. Depending on the information entered here, you'll then enter the actual utility data in a set of tables below, which you can expand by clicking on the plus signs here. For example, for electricity, you can see here we have entered a set of just kind of dummy test data for the purposes of this review. Here you'll enter the dates for from your utility bills, your usage, peak demand if we're looking at electricity, costs associated with that, and then if you'd like, custom electricity rates such as summer rates, winter rates, peak, partial peak, and off-peak rates. You can pick any kind of period that you like for the data that you're looking at here, but it should cover one continuous year of operation, and it should also be consistent for different fuels that are entered for the facility. Just to show another example here, for purchased steam, for example, It's a similar format where you enter the months for the data that you're looking at, the amount of fuel that's being purchased, and the cost. And then the tool will automatically calculate the blended rate associated with that. After entering your facility's energy use data, you'll then have a chance to pull together a little bit of an energy use summary that looks over your whole facility. So this will enter or will summarize the usage data that you entered above. You'll want to note the specific fuels and the units associated with that data, and then the total annual costs associated with that data. Here, you'll also have a chance to enter any on-site renewable energy production, whether that's thermal or electrical, and any exported data, for example, if your building is generating electricity and then exporting it back to the grid. And this will take all of that information, calculate your building's site and building level EUI, electric and gas and other fuel EUI, develop an energy cost index, and provide this graphic here on the right that summarizes your annual energy use by fuel. Finally, the very last part of the Building Info and Assumptions tab is a baseline operating budget. At the top of this baseline operating budget, we see a table here that's copying some of the data from above, where you entered standard reference information about different expenses at your facility, such as cleaning, utilities, security, parking, etc. And it calculates those dollars per square foot metrics against your total square footage. The calculator allows both the entry of a customized operating budget, a custom user input, but if you don't want to enter that, you can also instead use a standard reference operating budget. The standard reference operating budget is automatically generated based on these benchmarks provided around things like rentals or gross annual rent, repair and maintenance fees, etc. So here you can see it calculates out for an up to 20-year period, gross rent, vacancy allowances, income and effective gross income, and then various operating expenses. It'll multiply these against an escalation fee if you've provided that escalation fee in the table above. It then uses this to calculate total expenses, net operating income. Again, if you'd like to instead enter your own operating budget, you can do so in this table here in the blue cells. Here you can enter your gross rent, vacancy allowance, any other income, utility expenses, and all other operating expenses. And if you enter information here, it'll overwrite the default values and it'll use these to develop your baseline operating budget. So minimizing all of these sections, that's the overview of the Building Info and Assumptions tab.